Hello, children. It is I, Christina, and it is time for a story. I'm going to read you this book, whether or not it's legal. Doesn't matter, because it's a good book. So, this is part 1. Right, let's get to it. This story is near and dear to my heart. It's about Canadians. It's very accurate. Very, very accurate. Kind of. It's called The Trolls by Polly Horvath. For Leslie. How lovely, Leslie. Good for you. Good for you, Glen Coco. So, chapter 1. Aunt Sally Arrives is the first chapter. That's not what's... Okay. The week before, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson were to leave Tenderley, Ohio for the somewhat more bustling metropolis of Paris. Their babysitter, who had just returned from far-off climes herself, came down with a mild case of bubonic plague, and called tearfully to say she didn't want to spread the buboes around. "Oh dear, take care of yourself," said Mrs. Anderson, "and don't worry, I'm sure we can find someone." "Well, call me if you get really stuck," said the babysitter. "I'm sure we won't," said Mrs. Anderson hastily, and hung up. She wrung her hands and told Mr. Anderson the bad news. He immediately began phoning everyone he could think of. No one was available. Even the babysitting agencies were all booked up. Melissa Anderson, 10 years old, Amanda Anderson, 8 years old, and Pee-wee Anderson, 6 years old, watched their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, pace around the living room, waving their non-refundable tickets. "Well, this is a fine kettle of fish," said Mrs. Anderson. "What about a kennel?" said Pee-wee. "Are you going to put us at a kennel?" "No," said Mrs. Anderson, "we are not." "Kennels are for dogs," said Melissa, who always knew everything. "She said kettle," said Amanda, who often knew everything. "Oh," said Pee-wee, who knew nothing and led the life of a worm. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson told the children that they needed grown-up time to work things out. They made Melissa, Amanda, and Pee-wee go to bed early, went into the living room, and shut the door. The Anderson children kept downstairs and peeked through the keyhole. "What are they doing?" whispered Amanda to Melissa, who was kneeling in front of the door. "Mom is pulling fluffies off her sweater," said Melissa. "Oh dear," said Amanda. Amanda said that. "Dad is sweating. Oh dear." "How can you see him sweating?" asked Pee-wee. "I don't see it, I smell it," said Melissa. "I have a great nose." "You would be happy in a kennel," said Pee-wee. "I'm not going to a kennel," said Melissa. "I thought we told you to drop that idea," said Amanda, looking sternly at Pee-wee. "Wait a second," the children heard Mrs. Anderson cry. "Mom's jumping around," said Melissa. "Let me look," said Amanda, shoving Melissa out of the way. Mrs. Anderson was clasping her hands rhapsodically. "There's your sister!" "She's going to be in Chicago, remember?" said Mr. Anderson glumly. "No, not Lila. Sally." There was silence. "What are they doing? Let me," said Melissa, pushing Amanda away from the keyhole. "No, let me," said Pee-wee. He tried to push against Melissa, but she was rooted to the floor. "Daddy looks stunned," said Melissa. "Who's Sally?" asked Pee-wee. "You know Aunt Sally. We get a Christmas card from her every year. It's a picture of a moose with tree lights strung on it." "Oh," said Pee-wee. "Do you think she'll bring her moose?" "It's not her moose, dummy. It's just a funny Christmas card," said Melissa. "Nobody has a moose. What, did you think it was her pet or something?" said Amanda. "A moose would make a nice pet," said Pee-wee. "She's not bringing a moose," said Melissa. The children returned to eavesdropping. "Absolutely not, Doris," said Mr. Anderson. "It's only for 1 week, Robbie, just 1 week, and we don't want to forfeit our tickets," pleaded Mrs. Anderson. "Why do you think Daddy doesn't want to call Aunt Sally?" "Wait a second, he's picking up the phone," said Melissa. "Maybe he's calling a kennel," said Pee-wee. "There will be no kennel," said Melissa. She yelled it so loudly that Mrs. Anderson startled and made her way swiftly to the door and opened it. "What are you doing here?" she asked sternly. "Are you calling Aunt Sally? Can't your father and I ever have some privacy? Aunt Sally doesn't really own a moose, does she? Didn't I put you to bed a long time ago? Are you calling a kennel? Do you know how late it is?" They stood staring at one another with a pile of unanswered questions between them until Mr. Anderson got off the phone and came to the door. He was pale. "Guess who's coming Monday night?" he asked. "Aunt Sally, from Canada." That is part 1. if you guys want me to keep reading, let me know. If you don't, also let me know. I don't know if you guys think it's a good idea or not. I personally love this book. I think it's great. It involves mystery and intrigue and Canadians, and there's moose wrestling in it. So, who wouldn't love that? Right. If I do end up reading it, I'll probably only do it like once a week. So it's gonna take a long time to read all of it. If it's okay, like, we could do longer ones instead of just like 5 minutes of reading. We could do like 10 or 15 minutes, because then, you know, we get through it sooner. And it's not a very big book, but, you know, it's not gonna be done by the end of April, that's for sure. Right. So, tomorrow. Say goodbye, Stu.
Goodbye, humans.
Thank you.